Tales from the Ribble Valley by Cornelius MacManus and George Hull. Love in War's Clothing. A good dinner at a cheery old inn in the ancient village of Ribchester sent me well pleased upon my way. I was exploring the charming valley through which the Ribble winds and wanders. I had done my best to become familiar with the people who lived upon the banks of this beautiful stream. I ate of their daily food and drank of their strong beer. I also exchanged news of the whirling world from which I had come for the tales and legends that were on their ready tongues. "How do they? You're fast now." This was true. I had come to the mouth of a rivulet which fed the broader stream. I could neither jump the swift waters of this rivulet nor ford them. As I looked up the stream, wondering how far I must go to find a set of stepping stones or a plank bridge, the above words reached my ear. I looked across the stream and found that the speaker was a man, apparently a native of the place. His shoulders were saddled with a yoke like a small beam. From this depended two large cans, and it was evident that he was coming for water to the rivulet. "Yes, I am fast. How can I get across?" "I'll show you. Bide your time." The speaker slowly laid down his cans. Then he motioned me to go a few yards upstream. Then he pulled a large plank out of a clump of grass where it had been hidden. With the strength of a Hercules, he threw the plank across the water and steadied it with his foot while I walked across. While the man was filling his cans with water, I improved the occasion by asking what the water wheel a little way up the rivulet was for, and whose house was that on the other side of the Ribble. "That's Mester Wingle's house, sir. Isn't it a fine place?" I admitted that it was a fine home for a country gentleman. "And that wheel used to turn a circular saw and a lathe, and that sort of craft in old John Roper's time. Was old Roper a joiner then? A wheelwright. He thought he were best mon in these parts, but they soon cleared his house shop away when they getted him underground." "Was he an eccentric man, this John Roper?" I asked. "Well, he were what you'd call a arbitrary sort of a chap. Nobody ever knowed nowt but him. He were always right." I thought the late John Roper and my informant could not have been very good friends. The rustic water carrier was well acquainted with the faults of the late Mr. Roper, and he delayed upon his way to tell me an incident in which the distinguished wheelwright had been clearly worsted. The elder John had a son, whose name was also John, but whom all the neighbours called Jack. The parents themselves did not care for this familiar style of addressing their son and heir, and took every opportunity of showing their disapproval of it. One morning a stranger walked into the wheelwright's shed and asked if the father of Jack Roper was in. "No," said the wheelwright, turning and confronting the strange gentleman. "I have a son, but his name is John Roper. The register at the parish church at Ribchester yon will prove that." The stranger took in the whole situation at a glance. He just allowed Mr. Roper to see a large piece of silver before he slipped it back into his pocket. "Ah," he said, "it was Jack Roper who opened a gate for me when I was following the hounds yesterday. He told me his name was Jack Roper from the wheelwrights. I must have got to the wrong place. Good morning." John nearly choked with vexation, but before he could attempt to explain, the gentleman had left the shop. When Jack grew up, however, he was not so much his father's pride. The parent looked upon him as upon a prodigal. Both father and son wanted to be top sawyer, and many a bitter quarrel marked the period at which Jack began to forget that his father was an absolute monarch in his own house. Jack could whistle. Unfortunately, he had learned to whistle some very slow tunes, and worse still, he kept time to them with his plane or his saw. The father would bear the dallying for some time, every now and then darting a glance from his bench under the window at his errant son in the opposite corner. "Dang that whistle, it makes my head ache," said the old man, when he could stand it no longer. "Why, you used to whistle yourself up to lately." "Aye, but I never whistled them snail-creeping tunes. I like a good lively air, as'll help thee through thy work, and not send thee to sleep over it." "I don't work according to music, I work according to pay," said Jack, as he carefully glanced along the edge of his saw, and resumed his whistling in a lower key. "Pay be danged, thy teeth'll always run through more than thy hands will. Thou ought to be ashamed of being a burden on thy poor old feyther, a strong young chap like thee." "Well, I'll not be in your road no longer. Give me a sovereign, and I'll be off to neat and find work for myself. Then I shall be no more out of your pocket. Aye, and half of the country saying as I've turned thou out, it'd set every lazy tongue in parish wagging." Jack knew that he earned more than twice as much as he received. The run of his teeth, a few necessary clothes, and a little old grudge spending money represented the wages of constant toil, and on the whole he was a very good son, and gave way to his father's whims, excepting when they were carried into eccentricity. These little tiffs soon arose and were soon forgotten. Jack worked away willingly at his father's bench until he had attained his legal majority. About that time, however, circumstances arose which caused more disturbance in the wheelwright's household than anything which had preceded it. John Roper Senior came home one night with a flush of anger on his brow. It was noticed that he muttered to himself in accents of wrath as he walked along. John had heard from an authentic source that his son had actually commenced courting. This would have been all very well if the girl in question had been heiress apparent to a good sum of ready money, or even to one of those wheel plenish farms which Burns considered so attractive in matters of this kind. The girl had all in her favour, but one thing: she was poor. This one crime blotted out all the good qualities she possessed, at least in the elder John Roper's eyes. She poor, her father was poor, and she had been brought up in an atmosphere notorious for its hopeless poverty. Ruth Marsden's father was a handloom weaver. He, however, brought no subtle hand to his craft. He preferred out-of-door employment when he could get it, and only took up the shuttle when the scythe and hoe were out of season. The wheelwright had been home a little time when his son appeared upon the threshold. "I'd like to know if I've to start waiting up on the every night like this," was the fatherly salutation. "This is the first time as no have done it," answered Jack, "and it's once too oft to my thinking." "Well, you could have gone to bed. There's nowt for you to stop up for. I can get in very well myself, if you'll leave door unbolted." "Aye, I dare say, and have th' house full of thieves afore I get upstairs. Nah, if thou canna be home by 9 o'clock, thou maun't stop out. 9 o'clock's too soon. 10 o'clock's soon enough for anybody to be in bed. Aye, when they ain't getting a gate of wasting their time on women. I've heard as thou spends a deal of thine with that great thriftless lass to St. Marsden's. But let me tell thee as they'll have no more on it, so thou can stop it." "I think I should have a word in that," said Jack, blushing. He had never suspected that his father was acquainted with his love affairs. "Not if thou stops here. I'm no one bound to toil and slave to keep a ne'er-do-well rook as is just fastening themselves onto thee for t' little bit as they thinking they'll be when I've gone. But I'll tell thee once for all, as there's nowt. You've told me that mony a time, and if there is out, I don't want it. I don't want nowt, not but what I work for." "Well, but thou should do, if thou wants to suit thy old feyther, as has brought thee up all these years. Thou'll buckle to some lass as is a bit of brass of her own, instead of piking one out of the poorest family as there is in Ribchester." I think as you and me'll never agree on that point. So we'd better stop talking about it, said Jack emphatically. We'll stop at this, said the father, striking his hand upon the table. We'll stop at this, as if ever thou goes near Ruth Marsden again, as thou's out to do with her, in any way, shape, or form, thee and me'll have to part. Having said these words, the wheelwright jumped from his chair and went upstairs. Before he went to sleep, he told his wife that he had finally disposed of Jack's foolish match. He felt convinced in his own mind that there would be no more between his son and Ruth Marsden. But of course the old wheelwright was mistaken. There was no interruption to the band courtship, and the second scene between the father and son was worse than the first. It ended in the son vowing that he would leave home and seek his fortune, while the father, who didn't believe his son would leave the Ribble Valley, emphatically bade him go. Jack was absent all that night and the night after, and the parents began to get alarmed. Their idea of the repentant prodigal had not been fulfilled, and they feared that some ill luck had befallen their only son. On the 6th day after Jack's departure, the quiet streets of Ribchester were enlivened by the appearance therein of a scarlet coat, and young Roper, attired in the uniform of a dragoon regiment, walked proudly along. He was, of course, the admiration of all the schoolboys, but their elders shook their heads and wondered what John Roper would say when he found that his only son had enlisted for a soldier. Jack did not stay long in Ribchester proper. His path led through the fields towards his father's shop, and early in the afternoon he found himself in his old home. Mrs. Roper was busy baking, not so busy, however, but that her thoughts often turned to her missing son, when the latch of the door was lifted, and Jack walked into the cottage. The mother looked up at the figure in uniform, then, raising her hands, gave vent to an exclamation of surprise. John, that's never thee, is it?" "It is, mother. I've come to bid you good-bye." "Lord help us, what's the meaning of that?" "I've been enlisted." "Thou hasn't, really, Asta?" "Yai. Me feyther said he couldn't get on with me, so he'll now have a chance of trying to get on bout me." But thou never should ha' listed," sobbed the old dame. "Thy feyther were naught but in one of his tantrums. He was reet as could be in an hour's time." At this point the door again opened, and the wheelwright came into the house. He started at seeing the uniform, and was even more upset when he found that the soldier was his only son. "Jackie's been enlisted upon account of what thou said to him t'other night about Ruth Marsden," said the mother, by way of introduction, as she wiped her eyes. "The deuce! It's naught but lazy chaps as goes for soldiers. That doesn't actually mean to say as thou's taken Queen's shilling," said the father anxiously. "I have," said Jack decisively. At the same time he held himself proudly erect to show that he was not ashamed of his colours. "And it'll take a vast sight of money to buy him off," said the tearful mother. "It's not a matter of buying off. It's too late for that," said the son. "Nay, surely," exclaimed the father with a gasp. "As I said afore you come in, I've come to bid you both good-bye. We're ordered off to India, and we sail next week." Mr. Roper did not see the absurdity of saying that a recruit was about to be sent upon foreign service. He only protested more solemnly that he would buy his son off, whatever the cost might be. Jack, however, said that he liked the service better than the driving of nails and the sawing of wood, and affirmed that he should never consent to purchase his discharge. Mr. Roper was mortified. It was bad enough to have a son a soldier, but when that son was sent to waste his life upon a foreign soil, the very thought of such a catastrophe became unbearable. "You don't need to make such a mouthful on it," said Jack. "If you hadn't driven me away, I should never have listed." "I didn't drive thou away. I but said as I didn't think Ruth Marsden were the sort of a lass for thee, but I'd sooner have seen thee wed to her 100 times o'er than thou should have gone and thrown thyself away in this fashion. Then if I were out at th' army again, 'bout it costing you out, would you let me have my own way about it peaceably? Asked Jack. Aye, sure, said the old man eagerly, and the mother wanted to know if it could possibly be managed. Well, I'm not so sure, said Jack, meditatively. I'll see when I get back to Fulwood tonight. You see, they don't let 'em buy themselves off when they're ordered abroad, and then they're saying as we're going to have war with Russia, so they'll want all men as they can get. Before Jack left home, he promised that he would consent to be bought off from the army, but he added in a dignified manner that the money of which his father was so fond should never do it. He said he had friends elsewhere, and should not stoop to touch a farthing of his father's money. Jack had not gone far upon his way back to Preston, when he met Ruth Marsden. Jack, is it true as thou's listed? No. Well, what's them things for then? She asked, pointing to the scarlet coat and the round forage cap which the young man wore. Oh, said he with a laugh, them's for me feyther's benefit. What dost ta mean? Look at 'em. Do they look like new uniform? They are nasty, answered Ruth. Of course they are. I'll tell thee the secret, but thou mun keep it to thyself. My cousin Jack, as keeps the alehouse at Longridge, put me up to buying these from an old clothes shop in Preston. They're old cast-offs. I changed 'em in Wilson's barn yon, and I've left me Howdens there. But me feyther thinks as I've listed, and he says as if I'll be bought off, he'll let me wed thee next week if I like. And they will do, Jack? Will The remainder of the scene is not for publication, but it was, without doubt, a guarantee of good faith